Hello, my name is Darryl Robert Schoon, and I'm here with my colleague, friend, and fellow author, Ralph Terry Foster. I came across this man because he had written a book called Fiat Paper Money, The History and Evolution of Our Currency. My time is very limited. I don't do and I have to be very careful about what I do with it. So when I hear about things, I generally don't respond. But this book came to me under such recommendation that I was going to give it a try. I consider this book to be seminal because what it said about paper money. And I was having a conversation with Ralph this morning, and he said to me, you know, Darryl, this book on paper money is not about gold, but it really is all about gold. And I knew it, and I knew what he meant. And with that introduction, I'd like him to tell you why he thinks what he thinks today.
We all use paper money. World War I really started the fiat machine and the fiat system. A product of World War I was one Eric Maria Remarque. He wrote All Quiet on the Western Front. I call his, in 1926 it became a movie. 33 years later he wrote The Black Obelisk in Switzerland where he resided. I call it a sequel to All Quiet on the Western Front. It's the mess we make, the mess of war and how it affects the human condition through our money. This book is basically about the collapse of the German mark in the 1923 hyperinflation. Basically, hyperinflation, depression, whatever, it's really a story of currency collapse and how it affects the average man in the street. In the book, Remarque mentions they're arguing about the price of a bottle of cognac and in a brothel. And Remarque was there.
Remarque was there doing research for his book.
And it was 40,000 marks, and the lady wanted, well, it's been 2 days, it's now 20,000 marks. And the madam of the brothel made the statement, the dollar exchange is like death, you can't escape it. Well, that was the 1923 dollar, 100% backed by gold. Now with marks...
Backed by nothing.
Now it's backed by nothing.
No, yeah.
But as a result of that, I've came up with a new section for my book. A book that I never really have addressed gold directly, though it seems to be the biggest, it takes more space in the index than any other word. The gold exchange is like death. You can't escape it. Remarque was really talking about gold. As a matter of fact, he discusses the motivation for a lot of his writing of the Black Obelisk, and writing in general, was from a 20-mark gold piece. And he mentions in his book how it moved him to bigger and better things. But the gold exchange is like death. You can't escape it.
Now, Ralph, what we're talking about in Remarque's book, all right, The Black Obelisk, it was really a story of the rampant hyperinflation that happened after the aftermath and the chaos of World War I.
Yes.
When Germany's currency went to just nothing, all right? Now, we've had incidences of hyperinflation since then, but in relatively obscure, more places like Zimbabwe, Hungary, after World War II.
Venezuela.
Today. But they're not things in our scope of the collective consciousness that we inhabit. And the hyperinflation that has really left us with a feeling of what it really was like was of Germany in 1920s. Okay?
Yes.
Now in the United States, we had a period between 1971 and 1980 that economists call today the Great Inflation. All right? It was the greatest period of inflation in the 20th century in the United States between 1971 and 1980. All right? If inflation started out at like 3 and 4%. By the end of the decade, it was up to 14.5%. Okay? That's a huge increase in 10 years, 9 years. All right? And it was getting out of control. And what happened is that Volcker who was Assistant Treasury Secretary of the Treasury, who was instrumental in taking the dollar off the gold standard in 1971 because we didn't have enough gold to cover all the dollars that we had out. So they took them off. He did it, and by the end of the decade, gold had gone to $850 against the dollar. At the beginning, with $32 of paper gold, you could buy, of paper money, you could buy 1 ounce of gold.
Yes.
In the middle of the 1980s, it took you 850 paper US dollars to buy the same ounce. It exploded, all right? What Volcker had to do was raise interest rates to 21.5% at prime to bring it down and suck the air and the speculation out and the distrust of the dollar out of the system, and we killed, quote, inflation since then. All right, now, I have been looking at this, as you have, for decades, all right? And I've come to the conclusion that we've got two things going. Uncle Sam, which is the United States, which is almost an archetype for the large global economy, is like, he's not a young man. It's not the 1800s. It's not 1850, all right? He reached maturity in a certain way in the early 20th century, and then they put the Federal Reserve Bank in. Then he became a very wealthy man, all right? But his health decreased. But everybody thought he was healthy because of his power, all right? But the basis of his power moved from a gold-backed currency into paper, which you can print at will, all right? Now, the United States is awash in paper, all right? And on one level, we've never been richer. I mean, we're in the Bay Area, all right? And we were talking this morning about rents. One-bedroom rents in Berkeley, not San Francisco, I told them, our kids are looking for a one-bedroom, and they're looking for a little over $2,100, and you said, that's cheap. That's cheap. Right now, for a studio, they're paying $3,400 south of market, $3,400, all right? And this is a bubble part of the economy. There are other parts of our economy that are totally struggling. It's food stamps, all right? It's like that story, this was the best of times and the worst of times. And of course, it depended where you were,
right?
All right? At the top, it was never better. At the bottom, it was never worse, all right? And now what I see as we're moving forward is we've got two things happening. We've got deflation happening all around the world, all right, set off by the collapse of huge speculative bubbles, all right? And what the central banks have done to offset the deflationary collapse in demand is printed money faster and faster and faster, trying to put artificial demand to keep up the float, all right? And even then, the velocity of money is getting lower and lower and lower and lower. So we've got two things. My sense, but I've been wrong before, is this patient is doomed. All right? He's in his later years. What do they call it? Senescence? Like heading towards death.
But not particularly toward a German.
No.
I don't think
that's only one of the possibilities.
This was an engineered inflation.
Yes.
The debt we're carrying is so substantial. I'm scared of deflation.
Okay, now that I want to point out what you said. The 1920s hyperinflation was engineered. Why? Because the Germans owed such war reparations. The only way they were going to do it was to inflate their money and pay back the English and the French and everybody else who they money to. So it was an engineered inflation that got out of control. The concept of a deflation, that's what you're worried about. All right? But we're also building up next to it huge monetary base. There's something called AMBS or something. It's the monetary aggregates. It's not the M1, M2, M3. It's the monetary base off which the leverage of paper money can happen. And it's enormous. It's enormous. So we've got these two things. The possibility, the continuing of a specter of a complete deflationary collapse in demand versus the destruction of our currency.
Destruction of the currency is what fears me more.
Okay.
I remember watching something on one of my channels. A man was critical of the inflationist and then the deflationist.
All right.
I don't care about the inflationist. I don't care about the deflationist. I do care about the destruction of your currency, because your currency isn't gold anymore, and gold is still in the marketplace, and that exchange operates 24 hours a day, and it's convertible to whatever fiat currency has value.
I remember when I wrote my book, on the front page, on the leaf on the inside, it said, When stocks lose their value, that's a terrible thing. When real estate loses its value, that's a terrible thing. I said, but when money loses its value, that's the most terrible thing of all.
It never recovers.
It never recovers.
It does not recover. It is an unrecoverable. When a currency collapses, that's the cover of my book, The Collapsed Currencies That Have Never Recovered.
This book is an extraordinary book. It goes, Ralph put together a case history of every country in the world that has used paper money, starting with China, because that's where
fiat national
started.
issues.
Yeah, because why did the Chinese come up with paper money first? They invented paper, they invented ink, and they already had a government.
Mm-hmm.
All right? I mean, there you've got the triumvirate, the three-legged stool of disaster. We've got it today. It's never succeeded. And I really think I can only recommend this book and whatever you say for our listeners, our viewers, and to think about where we are today. And listen, these are most interesting times. People consider people like me and Ralph as a pessimist. We're not. We take the long view. We are living through the course of history. Every great era has come to a collapse, economic collapse.
Yeah.
And in every economic collapse, out of it rises a more evolved society.
I don't particularly want to see a currency collapse, and I'm not hoping we're going to have one. I depend on my Social Security check. I depend on my veterans' compensation check for injuries I received during active duty. I depend on the fiat system myself. Business always isn't that good, but I do own a coin shop and a little publishing house, and I can see the reality through the coins.
Those are the words of Ralph Foster.
I like the
Thank you.
reality of the coins.
Yeah.
I like that. They're real. They have a reality. They've lived through reality. They're still around. They're going.